How many of you in the room have actually been in a room when someone has spoken in tongues? It can be very moving. It can be frightening. Those speaking can appear drunk. Now, I have to digress for a minute to tell you this story. I used to teach French, and at Christmas time, I would teach my students carols in French. We would actually go caroling in the school from room to other people's classrooms. And my partner, Jill, at the time, taught English at the same high school where I taught French. And so I took a group of honors French students to her remedial English class. We went in. I spoke to my students in French and told them what carol we were going to sing, and we began singing. And we sang some familiar carol to her students in French, evidently without a whole lot of introduction. Her students were very nice while my kids were singing. And then Jill told me later when we left that someone said, "Oh, that was so sweet." And then a young man raised his hand and asked very sympathetically, "Are they all from special ed classes? Because none of them knew the words." Now, my purpose in telling the story is not to draw attention to this young man's very politically incorrect assumption, but rather to highlight how confusing it can be to hear what sounds like gibberish in this grammatical frame that feels familiar. But speaking in tongues can also be quite manipulative. When one person wants to dominate a space, or when it's used in order to indoctrinate children, associating their open hearts and their emotional experience solely to one frame, to one literal Jesus. And speaking in tongues can be also a pure and honest expression of one's experience of the holy. A means of getting out of the way and letting the sound come out without the weight of the word's meaning. I've been in a Lakota sweat lodge where this kind of singing is encouraged, where the words don't matter. It is very intimate, it is very moving, and it is very powerful. It was a transformative experience for me. It felt as though the sound was coming from somewhere else and filtering through my body from all around me. And it was only when I stopped singing that I realized that it was me. Now, as Unitarians, I'm not sure that we make enough room for the mystical in our lives. We definitely don't seem to be too condemning of the drunk. Go ahead, you can laugh. I believe that these personal, mystical experiences, though, are real, and at the same time must be flushed out. They must be held up to the light and examined with the rest of our understanding of the world, through the lenses of our biology and our chemistry, our culture and our history, and our reason. Now, you may not believe that a Unitarian could be struck by the Spirit, but I want to tell you a story. A story about an atheist being struck by the Spirit. When I was 16, I went to Paris for the first time. I was an atheist at this point in my life. I had been kicked out of a black Baptist church for being white. I was kicked out of a white Baptist church for dancing, and I gave up on the Methodists because they were just tired of my questions. My faith at the time was purely in education, and my frame at 16 was that I made my own meaning, and that religion, and especially Catholicism, had started most of the world's wars. So I walked into Notre Dame for the very first time. There was a choir singing Latin, and the sound bounced all around the stone walls of the room. The smell of incense was strong, and it was dark with candles just burning in every enclave, lighting up the stained glass windows. I remember looking at the choir, looking at the tall stone ceiling, made to draw the eye up so that the structure feels enormous and the people feel small. I remember looking at the floor and seeing the names of saints buried underneath my feet, carved into the stone floor. And I fainted. I was not drunk. It was after 9, though. I had never fainted before, and I have never fainted since. But in that moment, what happened to me was transformative. I felt whisked through history from creation to the present day, as though I was seeing it from the Creator's perspective. I saw the cathedral that I was standing in being built on the backs of the lower classes. I saw people being lifted up and worshiped instead of God. People being separated by religion. Centuries of wars fought in the name of God. And I felt this overwhelming sense of sadness and confusion. We weren't getting it. Humanity was just not getting it. And then I came to. I told very few people about my experience until I went to seminary, where there are a lot of nutty people. The question is not whether or not we actually have experiences where we feel extremely connected to something outside of ourselves. It is what we do with that experience when we do. It does not make someone better than someone else to feel connected. I actually think that many people have feelings similar to this, where we feel we are so deeply connected to our sense of awe that time disappears, maybe at the birth of a child or standing on a mountaintop. On analysis, this experience or this feeling might actually be quite ordinary. Now, that experience did not make me feel particularly special. It did not make me a Catholic or even a Christian for that matter. But it did help me to open my heart to believe that God could exist beyond creed. I already believed that the variety of religious expressions were just reflections of culture, and all those gods were too small. What I hadn't considered until this moment in my life was the possibility of a God big enough to transcend all of that. Now, as I understand it, most Pentecostals actually speak in tongues as frequently, if not more frequently, alone in private prayer, which focuses it more on a personal experience of God, a personal relationship with God, which is something that I believe Unitarians and Pentecostals actually have in common. I was actually going to title this sermon, Why I Am a Pentecostal, but since that has such a specific understanding in Oklahoma, I was afraid you might not come. Now, Unitarians and Pentecostals agree on a few things. We agree that the revelation of God was not only at one time for one specific group of people. It is available to us today to experience in our own lives. The miracles of God's creation are all around us. We both use umbrella terms to cover a variety of religious understanding and expression. Pentecostalism actually includes a wide range of different theological and organizational perspectives. But Pentecostalism, broadly explained, teaches that personal conversion is to be followed by holy living and exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit. I think we can agree with that. Unitarian conversion, however that happened to you, holds us accountable to live out our faith in the world as well as in church. And also, one of the key focuses of this church is to recognize that using our gifts, recognizing and using our gifts is not only important, but it could be translated to fruits of the Spirit.